Yeah, let's go to next speaker. It's Stefan Schweinfest, and he's the director of the UN Statistics Division. So you can say he's the highest statistician on the planet. So if you have any question to data and statistics, Stefan has an answer for everything. I'm pretty sure it's like that. So normally we would be all together in 1 or 2 weeks in New York for the UN Statistical Commission. But let's take it positive. We are together now virtually, and we have Stefan with us on board. And Stefan has the task from the UN General Assembly to build up a monitoring system for the 17 SDG goals. And it's fantastic to have you on board, Stefan, to give some insight what the UN is doing with different data sets you have and how do you visualize that. So Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here, to the organizer, and thank you to Vincent already to a very inspiring, getting us off to a good start. I learned a new word. I'm always happy when I do that. Attention economy. That's great. And I also agree with you that goal 17 is overlooked and critically important as an enabler. So when Diane and Benjamin invited me, I said, you definitely have the wrong speaker here, because I'm definitely from the last century, and I will lift the average age of the panel and probably everybody connected by about 100 years. But they still insisted that I should be there. And I must say, when I heard the overall title, I was personally touched, because it's about data and design. And my life has all been about data. I'm a trained economist and mathematician and became a statistician at the United Nations 32 years ago. And but my father was a marketing director, and he was a designer, and he was drawing at home, and he was always giving us the message that it's not only the product and the quality of the product that is important, but also the quality of the communication with the users and the clients. So that is something that I learned very early on. So let me talk a little bit about what we are doing with data at the United Nations, and it's going to be a quick panoramic flight. Of course, this is about visualization. So we put a quote of what I was told is the pop star of data visualization, Mr. Nathan Yao. And I think I'm not going to read you my slides. Most of the people in this show are adults, so I can think they can read. The most important line is the last line: achieve their goals. I mean, everything we do, compiling data, disseminating data, communicating data, visualizing data, is to help somebody achieve their goals. Next slide. The vision that we have is also the most important word on this slide is the word used, to make more and better data open, accessible, and used. I always say we are producing data as a statistical office, but a good data item is only an item that is actually used. And let me just reflect for a second on how the use of official statistics, which is what we are dealing with, government data on the economy, on social conditions, the environment, etc., they have been traditionally used by public policy decision makers. But I mean, that has changed. I think data, or especially international data that we have, including, like, for instance, trade data across the world, they are also used by the private sector, and the social data are also used by citizens in a spirit of accountability. And that is what Benjamin mentioned when we at the United Nations adopted the frame of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It was clear that we would need an indicator framework to follow what is actually happening in all of the countries around the world. And that is my central job, to get the data on the 169 targets and the 230 40 indicators that we defined from the 193 countries, so that we get a good idea who is having difficulties with this ambitious agenda, and why, and how can we help. Next slide. We started with a discussion on data revolution a couple of years ago, and now we are talking about data for sustainable development, and I just described it. Data in a statistical office at the very beginning are primarily numbers. We're talking about numerical data, and I will modify that in a little bit, in a little while, because now there are different types of data also. But what we are really trying to achieve, and this is the highlighted word at the end of this slide is insights, because we do not, data are a tool, they are communicating something, and they are communicating insights and understanding of the world around us. So this is critically important. So that's why, next slide, we do not want to only have data numbers sitting next to each other, so that people can understand them and discover them and have access to them. We need to give people data also that they can explore them, that they can share them and use them, and draw their own conclusions. So this has perhaps been changing in the philosophy of a data producer. The statistical officers who were traditionally just data producers, and they have put the data out there, and that was called data dissemination. And I noticed, very interestingly, in Serenella's title, the next speaker, it says Director of Data Dissemination and Communication. And that reflects a bit the mindset in the statistician's head over the last 10, 20 years, that it's not only for us to put data out there in a one-way channel, it is all about data communication. And that's why these platforms have become very important, because the platforms are a place for producers and users to meet and actually have a dialogue of on data. Now, we haven't talked, next slide, about visualization. Why is visualization important? It's not only putting numbers out there in the traditional table format, and I will show you in a minute how that looked for many, many years before and how it has changed, so that you get a visual of what has happened in the statistical office over the last couple of years. But visualization is also important, so that the user can find patterns in the data, can understand changes over time, can identify subgroups in a population, and, for instance, look at the geographical dimension, and even start to understand causation. But I mean, have not only the data as raw material, but also start to understand a little bit about the data relationships. So how has this changed? Let's now take a very quick look back. This is our statistical yearbook from 1948, our first issue, just after the foundation of the United Nations. And how did we present data? Infant mortality rates from 1932 to 1947. This is what I was working with for many, many years. Now, you may be thinking this is my start with the bad first, and then I'm moving to the good later. But this would be a little bit too simple in life. Even here, you have visualization, you have aids in the presentation that draw your attention to certain elements. There are lines that are bold, totals that are bold. There are lines that make it clear where are the big numbers on this table. So even in this very old-fashioned, rudimentary way of producing and presenting data, there are initial elements of visualization aids that help the user to understand what they are really looking at. Okay, this is the past. How does the world look now? Next slide. Here is what we are looking at now. This is the same type of information, mortality data. On the left-hand side, you see, and here are the two big dimensions that I'm dealing with, time and space. Time is, of course, we're describing development. So we always want to know how something developed over time. And this is, of course, the classical time graph to help us follow an indicator. And then the geospatial information has become increasingly important. Actually, it's now part of my program. It's not only statistics, but also geospatial information. And here you have, for instance, you can see at incidence of mortality and how it is different in different countries. And so much more appealing information than just a simple table as we looked at before. Now, I have to, looking at this, next slide, I have to make an important remark about data quality. It's always about data quality, and I couldn't agree more with Vincent. I am not for data visualization for the lazy ones, the ones that do not want to read the footnotes or the technical notes or the details. Data visualization is sometimes a helpful simplification of the very complex reality that is behind a set of numbers. But with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility, Spider-Man principle. Data visualization has to be done in a very responsible way. The first line of responsibility is the underlying data, and the source has to be good before you start visualization. And then the way you visualize, you start at some very elaborate level to manipulate people, drawing their attention to certain parts of the data. And that has to be done in a very responsible way. And here we are talking about data ethics. And I cannot emphasize this point enough. Now, next slide. Um, why do we want to visualize data? Well, we don't want to just throw the naked raw material at you. Data tells the story of somebody or some place or some group of people or an economy or a piece of our planet, the environment. And we want to ultimately tell that story, and data are a vehicle. So that's why data visualization is very important to help us to complete the storytelling. And that is why, next slide, when we have data publications today, as opposed to 1948, they look like this. This is our Sustainable Development Goal report in 2020, which gives all of the information for all the countries in the world on where they stand with the development goals. And you see on the right-hand side, we are using all kinds of data visualization tools, bar graphs, infographics, charts, maps. So the world has become a lot more colorful and a lot more interesting, also in the way we are conveying that information. And this is a print publication. Now I'll give you my final 4 slides. Let me check how I'm doing on the time. Almost okay. On my final 4 slides, I invite you to visit our data website, unstats.un.org. It's very simple. Where you find the following tools. This is what we call our SDG country profile, where you find the information on the indicators for all of the countries of the world. Here we have specific indicators for Colombia here. There are statistical and geospatial tools there. And the exciting thing is that you cannot only look at the numbers, because primarily, of course, we deliver the raw materials, the numbers, the databases, the underlying databases. But on these websites, you can play around with it. You can create your own graphs. We have done this also in cooperation with the private sector. Esri has helped us a lot with the mapping of the information, and we have the so-called Open SDG Data Hub, which is our global SDG database with some national data in the design format. And then you get these kind of things that you can play around with on our website. We also extended this. Next slide. Now that we had tons of COVID information, we have a special UN COVID data hub where you find information, COVID data, health care, resources, economy, population related, all the data that are relevant for looking at COVID. And last slide for me is our most proud product was a recent publication, which is called The World's Women 2020. And this is perhaps our most accomplished publication because it's not even in print. This is a publication that we do every 5 years, and we started in 1970 or 75, I'm now not sure. So we have done that many, many times, but you can see how this has evolved because the last publication from 2020 is no longer in print. It is only in digital format on our website. You can browse through it. You can play around with the data. You can create your own graphs, and you have highlighted stories. So this is a whole package deal, far away from the traditional square tables that statisticians used to produce, going a long way from where we are as the owner and producers of information to where we want the data to go, to the users, to produce understanding, insight, deeper knowledge, capability of taking decisions, informed decisions, and holding those people who have power accountable. And that's it. Thank you very much.